This is a Sportsy Media production, part of Quiet Loud Studios, the podcast network where reflection meets amplification.
Alrighty, everybody. Thank you so much once again for tuning in to the RAV, Raw, Authentic, and Vulnerable podcast here. My name is Jacob Newton. Got a very special guest coming on here today. Just met him yesterday. Don't really know too much about him. I know enough to know that we're going to have a great conversation here today, and it's going to go organically as it always does. But before we get into the episode here, as always, just want to take the time to thank everybody from the Sports Epreneur team for, again, creating this platform for me to continue coming on here, continue sharing my story, having guests on to share their story, to normalize and get people into a deeper understanding that it's not just 1 in 5 people that struggle. It's 5 in 5. We all do, we all have, and we all will continue to struggle. It's not a life of 100% struggle. We know that. We've got some rainbows and some sunshine in there. But again, we are all going to struggle at some point in life. And so, again, thank you to Eric. Thank you to Julian. Thank you to Scott. Truly grateful and blessed to have this platform. And with that being said, do not forget to like, subscribe, share with as many people as you possibly can. I'm feeling very good about the start of season 2 with this podcast. And there's so much more value already in 5 episodes compared to the 25 episodes that were available in season 1. The guests are getting stronger. Their voice is getting louder. Their stories are deeper. And after 4 years of growth for myself compared to season 1, I've grown a lot. And so the value that I'm bringing is only going to be increased as well. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to our guest here for him to introduce himself for as long as he wants. And then we're going to fire off and start blasting off. But nonetheless, here's Mike. Mike, if you would do so kindly, and just introduce yourself to the listeners, please.
Absolutely. Morning, Jacob. I appreciate you having me on your show. Firm believer in what you're doing here with this platform, and 100% agree with the message that everybody struggles. You know, nobody's getting out of here without some friction and some work and hopefully some growth, but that part's on the individual. So again, thank you for the opportunity. Good morning to the listeners. I appreciate everyone listening in. Give you a little bit of backstory on myself. Most of my story and what I'll touch on centers around my time in the special operations community. So I spent 10 years as a United States Marine, 8 of those years as an 0372 critical skills operator, otherwise known as a Marine Raider. The Raiders fall under the SOCOM division of MARSOC, which is basically the Marines' entry into the SOCOM field, right? So you've got your Army Special Forces, you've got Navy SEALs, you've got Marine Raiders, all kind of on that same umbrella of Special Operations Command. So I spent 8 years in the teams as a Marine Raider and had some very high highs and some very low lows, and a lifestyle that was very fast, very fulfilling, very rewarding, but also took a lot and can take more than you're willing to give if you don't kind of get yourself straight prior to going into that. So kind of what I want to touch on, and we can expand or go down whatever rabbit holes you like, Jacob, is how trauma can present you with options. It can present you with very positive options for growth, or you will absolutely become your worst self and live in a nightmare, which is what I did for a number of years. The story kind of begins for me on one specific deployment. I was in the Helmand River Valley, deep in the Helmand River Valley with the team. We were conducting, it's called village stabilization operations. Basically, the idea is you're out deep in territory that is not governed, right? So held mostly by Taliban. And the idea is to form alliances with local villages and elder leaders, build up a security force, a militia force, if you will. Afghan local police was the term we used for them. And then with that militia force, secure that area. So it's using the national people from that area to police and secure and to combat the destabilizing force, which in this case was the Taliban. That's what we were doing out there. Again, very, very forward of friendly lines, very much out in Indian country, and not a lot of support. So it was pretty kinetic, as you can imagine. A lot of trading led with the Taliban, sometimes very directed missions on our part. So collecting information, using that intelligence, and then making targeted moves to either eliminate or influence the adversary. So in this time frame, on one of these nights when we were attacked, I ended up losing 3 teammates in one fight, and that was devastating. At the time, you compartmentalize because you have to. You're very much in a situation, a troops in contact, a tick, a firefight, whatever you want to call it, where you don't have time to process that. You do what you can for them, try to keep them alive, medevac and get them out. And then it's very much right back to orders of business, which is resecuring your area and expanding your security bubble and then hunting the adversary, which is what we did. And we did it effectively. We did it all night. We got air on station and we prosecuted a lot of adversary personnel. And we continued to do so throughout the rest of the deployment. But what happened, what kind of became a habit of culture for myself and a lot of the other operators, was that we didn't have the opportunity to process, decompress, and deal with the loss of our brothers, which over time became just a habit of action. At first, it was a necessity. You need to compartmentalize that stuff. You don't have time to feel those feelings and to go to those dark places. But then you get comfortable not doing so. At least I did. I just kind of stuffed all those emotions and stuffed all that loss and all that frustration and hate and rage down into my rucksack and just kept going. And then when I rotated back, it was like, I want to live my life now. I don't want to deal with that right now. I'll deal with that later. That'll come up whenever it comes up. The old adage of time heals all wounds is absolutely false. Time doesn't heal anything. The individual heals no wounds. So I left it for far too long. And as you might imagine, that frustration, that rage, it would kick up in very unhealthy ways. For me, alcohol. I turned heavily to alcohol. I used it to sleep, and I used it to just suppress my rage that was steadily growing over years. Finally, I got to a point where I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't live that way anymore. I was very much what you might call a functioning alcoholic. Just getting hammered probably 3 times a week, working as a government civilian official with a high rank, high title, high security clearance, on paper, everything great. And absolutely hating my life, hating the work, hating who I was, not liking the reflection in the mirror. And I knew it had to stop and I knew it had to change. I just didn't know how to do it. So I did what, most reasonable individuals would do. Read a bunch of books, watched a bunch of self-help bullshit. That industry, I would say, is probably just as saturated as the health, food, and fitness industry. And as we all know, that's kind of a 90% bullshit field. So I got to a point where I came to the realization, drum roll, the only one that can fix you is you. I had to take a hard look at who I was, take a hard look at how I'd been living my life, what I was doing, and the change had to come from within. I had to accept that I had fallen way off the path of honor, righteousness, strength, and self-mastery, which I consider to be pillars of a man, into like a more Dionysian self-appeasement. If it feels good now, do it. Carpe diem, whatever your flavor of that was me. That was how I lived. So it took time. It took a lot of painful introspection to realize there was nothing I could have done to keep my brothers alive. So the survivor's guilt was there and could start to go. I did everything I could before and after, and there was nothing else to be done. And the life I chose to live, I started living by default, was 100% preventable. I just needed to do the work, and I didn't. I needed to finish that violence equation. I needed to do the math on the back end, gather the materials for the analysis, and let all that pain and hate and rage and survivor's guilt go. And until I did that, I was very much locked in a pattern that at the end of that road was probably prison or death.
Wow, brother. Well, thank you so much, first and foremost, for sharing all that you did there. It's obviously just an incredible story, right? And one of the biggest reasons why I'm so excited to have you on as a guest is because you've lived a life I will never live. You've seen and done things that I've never seen and that I will never do. What you just explained right there, I don't know if I'll ever experience losing 3 of my brothers. And okay, sure, they're not blood. It doesn't matter. You guys were in the trenches every single day. You formed a brotherhood. Those are your soul brothers. And then you had kind of touched on as well how you weren't exactly given the space to process this stuff, right? Because you were out there performing. You had to be dialed in. You had to be focused. It wasn't a situation where, okay, I just saw my 3 brothers killed. Okay, now I've got an hour to just sit here and relax and think about it. No, you were in the heat of battle. And so how do you think those experiences and those situations sculpted you as a man, which ultimately led you into the bottle, into the drinking? Was the drinking a symptom of those experiences, or did you find through the work you've done on yourself that the drinking was a symptom of stuff outside of that, maybe from previous life experiences before that? So could you dive into that for the listeners, please?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're spot on. It was absolutely that trauma that really lit the fuse to that explosives, if you will. Other things from my past, I've always kind of had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And, there's childhood traumas, there's insecurities, there's all the doubts that we have as men, because frankly, we are faced with a burden of performance. In order to bring value to anything, a man has to perform, like it or not. That's just kind of a fact of reality. So I always used alcohol as like a numbing agent to kind of numb away the stress, the pain, the guilt, the lack of confidence. Am I really good enough? Am I really who I say I am? Or is this just some facade that I throw up for the world? It took all those doubts and all those feelings away. And that's, it was a nice place to be for a number of years, because, I could have my fun. I could numb out all the negativity. Maybe I'm hungover, maybe I'm not, but then it just goes away. But obviously that's not a permanent fix. That's a very temporary, very unhealthy fix, because it doesn't allow the soul to really heal. Like, you got to feel that pain. Like, you got to stand in that pain for a while, and you got to face those losses, those failures, those character defects, all those flaws. And it's fine. Like, it's okay. We all have them. Everybody has them. We tell each other we don't, and we post wins on social media, and we've got this whole rise and grind bullshit that gets propagated through social media. That's not how people are supposed to live. It's my belief that we are intended to have intense periods of friction, whether that be growth, combat, creativity, productivity, very tense periods of friction, followed by in-depth periods of introspection, reflect, analysis, and growth. And I wasn't doing that. I was just trying to just win. So yeah, the drinking was very much systematic throughout my life. I would say that trauma, that combat trauma, and the survivor's guilt that went with it was really what was really the booster that kicked that charge into overdrive for me.
And most likely because you weren't given the space to process it right when it happened, right? What happened is that there was another moment, let's say 2 days later, when the thoughts, the emotions came from the combat trauma, and you pushed them down again because you were in the heat of a battle, or you were talking with the boys. And how long was it from the death that you experienced before you actually started any type of true work, internal work? What was the time gap there?
Years. I would say a good 5 years. It became, when I say it became a habit of action, it very much did. A habit of action, and then a habit of life. Yes, this happened. Yes, it sucks. Nothing I can do about it. Moving forward. And again, that when you're on mission, when you're on deployment, when you're in a fight, and even afterwards, like, your head has to be there to disconnect from that hypervigilance, that hyper awareness, in order to feel some of those deep feelings of loss. It's just not acceptable, because you're still very much in it, and you still have other brothers that are depending on you, and you're depending on them for, quite literally, for survival. So then, months go by, and you just kind of get into that habit. Years go by, you stay busy, you go on to another team, you go on to other deployments and other missions. before you know it, you've just kind of stuffed that so far down into the rucksack that it's not something you actively even think about addressing anymore. I mean, I kind of knew I never dealt with it in the back of my mind, but I figured, I chose this life. I chose to be a special operator. Like, these things happen. So fucking go, deal with it.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't change the fact that you are still more human than you are the combat soldier. You still have the humanness to you that you will always have. So prior to this experience, and then you had mentioned, okay, it's a 5-year gap before you started the internal work. Was there any type of self-development prior to this trauma that you experienced, so that when it came time to actually facing yourself, maybe it was a little bit easier? Or was there no prior work up until you started the introspection?
There was. I think everything we do in this life is kind of practice for meeting your better self. We're always kind of getting a little bit better, even when we're failing. I do believe that everything we do adds to the sum of who we are. So even in our worst selves, even in our worst shadow moments, there's still opportunity there to take positivity and to become a better version of yourself. So yeah, I mean, there have always been periods of growth in my life where I have felt closer to the version of the man that I truly want to be, and walked in honor and walked in strength, courage, mastery. And then there have been times when I completely blow that out my ass. So yes, there were periods where, I put the bottle down, and, there's a period of time there's a couple of periods of time I didn't drink for about 3 years at a time. And, surprise, surprise, life was pretty good because that fog wasn't there to prevent me from really connecting with my soul, with who I am at my core, not who I tell myself I am.
Yes.
So yeah, to answer your question, yeah, there were periods where there was a lot of growth and there was a lot of development and there was a lot of mastery, the joy of becoming a part of an elite unit and working with these men that are the best in that field, and then looking to you like, I need you to be your best because I'm my best. And we can't all be what we need to be without 100% on everybody. And I know you probably experienced that in the sports world with hockey. Like, you really look to each other like, hey, man, we got to be good. We got to be on top.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And I reflect back on probably the toughest moment during my career had nothing to do with my career. It had everything to do with my personal life and going through a divorce, being 5,000 miles away from my kids and then wife. And now I'm on an island and I've got to show up in 2 days to the rink and I've got to be that guy. And thankfully I had 2 days to kind of analyze the situation. Okay, how am I going to navigate through life now? I'm 5,000 miles away from now my ex-wife and my 2 kids, and all I want to do is just be with them. But I've got a job to do in 2 days, So there is some similarity in regards to that, and the fact that you were also being a performer, a mental performer, not just performing for yourself, but also performing for those outside of you so that you can show up as your best version, regardless of what that version is now compared to the version that you are today. But in order for them to feel safe, they got to know that Mike is there and he's showed up and he's here and he's present with us, And so what is life like now? I see you're at a base there. Are you still in combat? Like, are you still being deployed, or are you kind of outside of that now? And maybe life, there's a new normal for you to where now you have more space to do the inner work on yourself.
Yeah. So I'm still involved in Department of Defense. I've been lucky enough to work in a training capacity. So I teach. I'm a weapons and tactics instructor out here in California at one of the bases in California, and I get to work with a myriad of different types of shooters. I get infantry, Marines. I worked with some EOD guys the other day. Worked with some force guys and some recon battalion guys. So it's really rewarding to be able to take a high degree of knowledge I have about combat, about the way of the gun and maneuver warfare and small arms tactics, and give that to the next generation and stay abreast of what they're doing and kind of stay in that warrior lifestyle, which I've always gravitated towards. But now I'm in a role where I can really do something even more fulfilling in my mind. I've been to the big show. I fought in the Super Bowl. We did all the things. We jumped, dive, controlled air, hit high value targets on raids, all of those things. And now I can give that information, that knowledge, that experience to the next generations that are gonna be tasked with some of those mission sets. For me, that's very rewarding. But to kind of touch on what you'd mentioned and answer your question a bit, yeah, it is an environment. It is definitely a positive environment where it's high paced, but I'm not operating in the red and in the black anymore, to where you have to make those snap calls and you have to emotionally compartmentalize, because that's a reality. You're going to have to do that when you go there. So I have the time. I've given myself space now to where I have the time to do that post analysis, that day by day breakdown of like, you know what, you could have done that a little bit better, or you lost your temper a little bit there, and that's not who you are. Self mastery. Come back to those pillars of manhood, courage, strength, honor, mastery, and very much live like an Apollonian discipline lifestyle. So not to go down too many rabbit holes, but the Greek god Apollo, the idea of always bettering yourself, always striving towards your highest version of man, reaching for the stars and falling short and then reaching again anyway.
Yeah.
So it gives me space to live that way.
Powerful stuff there, brother. And I applaud you with that. Again, you've done things, seen things that I'll never will. But when it comes to your current role and now what you're doing with the next generation of Marines, soldiers, you had mentioned that now you experienced so much of what they are currently and then what they will in the future. And so through that, you're able to pass down the knowledge. What knowledge that you're passing down now would you see at a higher level, or maybe a little bit more important in regards to what you're teaching them in regards to the guns and the shooting and what they're going to experience out there in the heat of the battle, compared to the other side, understanding the mental health and the role that plays and how they're going to be able to show up for their brothers? So are you bringing in both aspects, or are you hyper-focused on one or the other, or are you trying to find a balance now in regards to how you're giving back?
Yeah, it's a great question. Letter of the law, there's a contract, and there's, requirements to be taught, things to be instructed. So mission first, obviously, teach the tactics, teach the experience, teach the mechanics, teach them the way around the weapons and the way to win gunfights and the way to increase survivability through violence of action, accuracy, and mastery of the skill sets. But as you said, that's only one side. That's only one side of the equation, right? The other side is, how do you process all, how do you deal with all this shit? And it's a very personal thing. It's very different for guys. They approach that from different walks of life. Some guys are very religious. Some guys are very introspective. Some guys are not. They just want to win gunfights and get drunk and, do all the things that go with that lifestyle. And that's fine. I'm not here to tell them that's wrong. But what I try to do in a very non-intrusive, like a very light way, is give them a picture, an image of what right could look like in the way I carry myself. So the way I speak to them, the way I speak to the other employees there, the way I carry myself, I will work in concepts of self-mastery, because it applies to both. You have to become a master of yourself before you can even think about, winning a gunfight or have any business in violence whatsoever. You have to be a master of yourself. You have to be physically fit. You have to consider nutrition. You have to be emotionally sound. You have to be grounded. So just getting dangerous and just being deadly isn't the full picture. You're not 100% a warrior if you haven't considered the emotional and the spiritual side of it. You can't be this unhinged, crack shot that never loses. And then, those guys, frankly, they have a lot of problems later in life. I've had more than one former operator friend check off station because, their internal demons got to be too much for them, and they're no longer with us. So it's one of those delicate situations. I do bring it up and I do touch on it and cover it, but very lightly. One, it's not my primary focus, and two, everybody deals with that stuff a little bit differently. And whether you like it or not, the bottom line is you are going to kind of have to walk alone through that fire. Absolutely, I'll be there for support, and your brothers will be there for support. Turn to them and lean on them and talk to them and get their advice. But again, nobody can fix you but you, and nobody can make you better but you. Like, no one else can do that. Not higher powers, not self-help books, not psychiatrists, psychologists. You have everything you need already there. You just got to choose to use it.
Amen to that. And that's something that I think is not completely. I think it's starting to come back and heading in the right direction now in society in regards to what you just said there. You have everything you need. And the current situation that most people do is they look outside themselves to get more information on themselves. And sure, there is some value there. I'm not saying there's not. Like, I know for me in my healing journey, I had to read the books. I had to read the self-help books to realize, holy fuck, I can do this all on my own. What they're talking about is just their life experiences from their perspectives, and that's great. But if I want to learn the most about me, I've got to analyze myself and go reflect back on my life experiences, and understanding that it was all there, again, try and teach me a lesson. So what type of advice then would you give a person that is potentially thinking about joining the arena that you're in regards to that self-development? Is there advice to start now before you're in a year, or is it wait until catastrophe and then start?
No, that's a great question. And again, I'll take it back to the ancient Greeks. Very first axiom, line 1, Apollo's temple, know thyself. Is this what you want, or is this who you are? Have you seen a cool ad, watched movies and played video games, and you think it's interesting, or are you really a warrior at heart? Know yourself before you get yourself into it. A lot of people fall in love with the idea of special operations, and then once they're exposed to the reality of it, they quickly realize this is not me. This is not for me. This lifestyle is just too much. Yeah. So I would stress, know thyself going in. Know who you are. If it is you, congratulations. Now go find out for sure. Cultivate a strong mind. Master your emotions. Nothing is less attractive than a man that is always pissed, always getting into fights, can't control his anger, can't control his rage. He may have great training, great strength, great capability, but he's a fucking liability because he has zero self-mastery. So you got to master yourself. And that's not easy. That's not easy. The service will help you get there, and they'll show you ways to sharpen that spear down even tighter. But it's already got to be a pretty good weapon going in. You know what I mean? Like, you got to do that on your own. So yeah, know yourself and always get to the best level that you can be. Best version of yourself, best physical fitness, best sound mind, best nutrition, and then enter those arenas ready for what's going to come. Know what you're getting into, know what you could lose. Great bodily harm or death, lose your mind, lose your wife, lose your money, lose your friends. All of those are real. I don't say them to scare people away, but all of that's on the table when you enter that arena. And I apologize, I'm getting low on power here. Something about the Trons getting sucked out of the ground out here, but I'll kind of wind down and just say that nothing is not attainable. If you want to be a special operator, then go be it. If you want to be, you want to get a master's degree, then go do it. If you want to travel, then go travel. But wherever you go, whatever you do, you're still you. Like, you're still you at your core. Those things aren't who you are. Like, I worked in special operations. I'm not a raider for life. I'm Mike. I came into this world as me. I'm going to go out as me. And focus on those strengths and weaknesses. Cultivate that Apollonian discipline of always trying to be better. That doesn't mean always winning. It doesn't mean stacking wins or rise and grind or any of that shit. That means know yourself, recognize your faults, improve those faults, and become the best person you can spiritually, physically, mentally, on all arenas. Have that self-mastery.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest game in anybody's life, and the most difficult game, because for far too long we've been kind of pushed away from ourselves and disconnected from ourselves. Starting at well, exactly, right. And when it's ingrained in you in the subconscious from the moment I reflect on parenting, being a parent, like. So many parents say that they don't want to create just like a mini me, another me. But what are parents constantly doing is protecting their kids from the things that they're afraid of. And so through that, done consistently, you literally just create another mini me, But going back to what you said in regard. Yeah, well, exactly. 100%. It's generational, as it is for everyone. But earlier you had mentioned, again, know thyself. And I think that for the listeners, because not all listeners are going to have the history that you have, right? Most of them, some of them are going to be in the arena of a parent or as a husband, right? Or as a coworker, an employee. Mastering yourself is only going to increase your performance in whichever arena that is. But if you're not mastering yourself at some point in the arena that is your way of supporting your wife or supporting your children or supporting your friendships or just yourself, if you're not taking care of yourself away, at some point it's going to bleed into the performance in the arena that it matters the most. One thing I do now with any of my clients is, sure, I work with hockey players, but I don't really want to talk to you about hockey. You've got that. You've got coaches for that. I want to help you to create harmony between life away from the sport and then life within the sport. Because when we're not healthy outside, it's going to bleed into what you're trying to do with your life, the identity that you have, So I think you said you have low storage. I don't know if does that mean you have to go soon?
Yeah, but keep going here.
Yeah,
man. I apologize.
No problem. Hey, this is organic. This is how it was always supposed to be. So no resistance. Yeah. But I do have one final question for you. In terms of strength, what has been the hardest and the most powerful, strong decision you've ever had to make in your life?
Admitting I was wrong and admitting I failed. Really looking that in the face and saying, yeah, that was garbage. That's not who you are. It's not who you have to be. And you're not going to do it again. But you fail. You fail. I think that has to happen.
Yeah. So you would then say that the hardest thing that you've done in your life essentially is facing yourself, owning yourself in your past situations, experiences, choices, decisions. So I just wanted to bring that up because I want the listeners to understand that, especially the men and the stigma around opening up around men, capital MEN, mental health. This man has been through the ringer in life. He's seen death. He's maybe killed people. And again, he just confirmed that the hardest thing he's ever done in his life is face himself. So that is true strength right there. Do not allow this society to harden you, to get you into thinking that that is a weakness. Because again, we are men. We have human emotions, no different than women. We've got to be addressing those, managing ourselves in the face of the chaos. But again, facing yourself is going to be the most important thing here. So anyhow, we just lost Mike. So talking about a perfect time here to end this podcast, shorter than we've gone before. But again, I think there was a lot of value in just getting this man to come on and share his story. Again, it's inspiring. Again, that man went through and he experienced death and he lost 3 brothers right there in the midst of a battle. And he didn't have time to sit there and go and comfort and hug them and cry about the fact that he just lost these men that he has been through training and practice to get to this exact scenario. And in practice, guess what? Did not happen. Nobody died in practice, to my knowledge, right? Based on what he shared. And then he got to the game, he got to the performance, and boom, on the spot, 3 men died. So his level then of self-mastery, his level of inner work was going to dictate how he was able to move through that experience, right? And again, he wasn't ever given space and time to go and process these things. And so then he turns to the alcohol. I mean, I don't know what the hell I would have done. And it was, again, reflecting on my story, it was alcohol for me as well. It was the marijuana, it was the chewing tobacco, it was the womanizing and the hookup culture. And so he was living a fast-paced lifestyle to where when we're in that fast-paced lifestyle, when are we ever slowing down? And we're usually not, because slowing down is boredom. We don't want to be bored. We are uncomfortable when we're bored. So let's just maintain this lifestyle. I'll go out party. I'll do the drugs. I'll do this. I'll do that. And I will do anything and everything I can to stay away from myself. But thank you again, Mike. I know you're not on here now, but thank you so much, brother, for coming on and sharing your story. What an inspiration. I know that there's going to be some people out there that your story is going to resonate. So I'm just beyond grateful, feeling blessed that you were willing to come on and share the things in your life that, again, I will never experience. So anyhow, that's going to be it for episode 6 of the Raw, Authentic, and Vulnerable podcast. I love the fact that it just ended. And that's why this podcast is better than every single one out there, baby. Let's go. Again, thank you to everybody at Sports Epreneur for creating this platform for me. For all the listeners, spread the message. Let's get this podcast out there because, again, I don't know how other podcasts do it. I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts, and I'm just tired of these preset questions. Therefore, the host gets to control the dialogue, control the narrative. No, we don't want that. How can I feel safe if you're controlling everything? Anyhow, love you all. Stay blessed. Stay grateful. Keep shining. Continue the inner work. The deepest level of work you're going to do is in the privacy of your own heart. You can't go and do somebody else's work, just like nobody can come along and do your work. You have to be willing to sit in the flames of your own fire. I believe in your ability to do that. I know you are able. I know you are capable. It just comes down to the willingness. I love you all. Stay tuned for episode 6 that will come shortly after this. Stay well, stay blessed, stay grateful. Ciao.
This is a Sportsy Media production, part of Quiet Loud Studios, the podcast network where reflection meets amplification.